really it's now intelligence-led, but technology-enabled is the key in my view. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the intelligence-led piece is not just the analytics. It's not just forensic accountants looking at the numbers. They can give you the quantum. They can do this. They can do that, which is great. But they don't really tell you what's happened. So you need somebody human to say that. And it turns out that one of the guys that we'd actually charged for the offence was going to give evidence against a corrupt police officer on a team next to me, in the same office, but just the other side of the door, who actually was his corrupt relationship.
I see.
So we lost a massive case due to that.
What's the weirdest motivation you came across over the years that you said to yourself, I can't believe it?
Well, there's one very simple one.
Hello and welcome to the Intelligence Advantage podcast, where we talk to the movers and shapers in the investigation and intelligence space. My name is Gary Miller. I've been an investigative lawyer for nearly half a century, and I'm also the chairman of the IFG, a network of international investigative and asset recovery lawyers.
Today, I'm delighted to be joined by a really good buddy who I haven't seen for a long time, but we're going to correct that this week. John Brennan, who is the CEO and founder of his own investigative group called the Brennan Group, based in New York, Washington, and in the UK, and has been a public servant for nearly 20 years and the rest of his time in the private sector, which we will get into in much more detail over the next 60 minutes. John, welcome. It's absolutely wonderful to have you with us.
Gary, thank you, sir. I don't know who you're talking about there. That was far too good.
Well, don't worry. The money in the Swiss bank account has been well paid for. Don't worry.
Nothing changes.
Nothing changes. So I've got to ask you, first of all, tell me about the Brennan family. I mean, were either mum or dad or anyone in the family in the investigation trade or in the police or anything? How did you come to get into this business?
Very, very interesting. Basically, the answer is yes. I've got my great-grandfather was a detective sergeant at the docks in London at the turn of the century. My father was a chief superintendent and was in the era of the Crays and the Richardsons. And of course, I turn up a little bit later, having said I'd never be a police officer as long as I live, because I've seen some of the bad side of what it did in terms to my mum and dad got divorced and so forth. But the next thing is they're back together, which unfortunately they just passed, but they ended up remarrying each other. So there's something there that was interesting, to say the least. And then, as I say, I actually started off a career as a teacher. I actually was fairly good at football and cricket, believe it or not, and thought that was going to be my career. Failed at both and got the sack from both, so therefore I had to find something else to do, and I ended up becoming a PE teacher. So I ended up going to Exeter University, to St Luke's College,
right,
where I had 3 fantastic years. So really I came to the police much later than most. I was 25 plus, which in a way was quite an advantage, because you've had a bit of life experience that most of the guys that join the police are not,
And how do you start off? Do you start off at training college? What was the beginning of your career?
Absolutely. I went around, I'm 6'3", so with a big helmet on and the silly hat, I was more like 6'8". And yes, I had to do the normal beat patrols. I started off at Romford. My first arrest was for cattle rustling, which I thought was quite bizarre. But then I very quickly had a bit of a prowess for the detective work, and I ended up going on an attachment to the CID, and I helped solve a quite nasty crime out in Upminster in Essex. And I never went back. I was supposed to go back to uniform, but they said, no, you can stay. I was a little bit older. So I ended up basically, following a sort of detective's career path. The police kept wanting to send me on extended interviews for rapid promotion. I kept saying no, I want to do it the normal way,
right?
Which was quite interesting. So that's how it came about. And then I sort of morphed into just pure detective work.
Now, tell me, first of all, I want to go back because I've never heard although that's not true, I do somehow remember you telling me about the family background, but the very first policeman in the family was your grandfather or great-grandfather?
Great-grandfather. It was Ginger Brennan. It was a great big tall Irish DS.
Ginger Brennan, I love it. Where was he? Where was he
Limehouse police
Limehouse,
station. So he was going after the Chinese opium dens in the day at the turn of the century.
right?
And I only know this because my father and my uncle did a bit of a digging into this. And basically, what they found is that he was there. My father was actually at Limehouse as a uniform inspector,
But hold
and
on,
I
what
actually
about the
served.
gap in between? The
Gap
grandfather?
in between. My granddad, my
Yes.
father's father, he actually was on the Royal Yacht. He was a purser on the Royal Yacht.
Oh,
So half
wow.
of my yeah, it's a strange story. So half of my uncles and aunts on that side, and there's lots of them, very Irish, I'm afraid. I think it's 13.
Oh my
Half of
God.
them were born in the Bahamas into absolute luxury, and half of them were born in the East End of London after the crash. So you can imagine it was quite a interesting mix of uncles and aunts.
Okay.
But great grandfathers, etc., etc. So the bottom line is, he's the missing link, as it were. But
Yes.
he certainly saw a
What was
lot of the
his
world.
name, John? What was your grandfather's name?
Joseph, Uncle Joseph,
Joseph.
Joseph Brennan, yeah,
It's a
and
lovely
Joseph
biblical
Francis,
name. You could be
yeah,
Jewish
Joe.
as well as Irish.
Well, there you go. You never
You never
know.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Well,
so
I'm a
how
John. I'm a John. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, how is it that the policing jumps a generation and then your father decided that this was the tradition he wanted to continue? What was behind that, do you think?
Well, I think basically it was post Second World War. So my father lied about his age and ended up on D-Day for his sins. He was a Royal Marine, then ended up out in Burma, which was obviously quite traumatic at the time. He was releasing all the prisoners of war along those terrible railways and things. Never talked about it too much, but when he came back, he obviously demobbed. Started off as a milkman. He always says he started as a milkman, but then decided, well, hang on a minute, there's something else here, and joined the police. So he liked the military side of the world, and he thought, in those days, quite a lot of people that came out, as I'm sure you're aware, went into the police service, and so that's how it happened. So he joined in London, obviously, in the East End. And eventually he ended up, as I say, a chief superintendent up in the West Midlands, please.
Wow. And what was the most famous case that you recall that your dad handled?
Did I don't know if you recall the Cannock Chase murders many, many moons ago. He was one of the local detectives in Cannock Chase, north of Birmingham, north of Walsall. And there was a guy that was obviously kidnapping the little kiddies and doing terrible things to them, burying the body up in Cannock Chase. But anyway, so that was the one thing I always remember. That took a heavy toll on him. Actually, it was a very they knew a lot about the suspect they were trying to get at, and they didn't quite get it, and other people were killed. So it was a big, big.
I
I can
bet.
always remember. I was only tiny, but I was probably what 10, I suppose, in those days.
And I was going
But
to ask
yeah,
you that question. You will come on to the sort of chronology in a minute, but the impact psychologically, which is not often, you don't often see it when you are looking at movies and stuff, but the psychological impact of, for example, particularly with your dad, who was investigating some really nasty pedophilia or something, it must be huge. How do you separate, John? How do you separate that stuff that you see every day?
I think it. First of all, nowadays people recognise it a lot more. In those days, my dad's days, it was not spoken of. But you saw it when he got hung. There was clearly something. Well, I always remember it. It was very, very clear. You never saw him. He was always up early in the morning. Don't forget, there was no mobile phones in those days. There was no computers. It was all legwork. But when jumping forward a generation, to me, I always found that you still now to this day, some of the terrible things you've had to see, they do affect you still. That you cannot help but have a flashback every now and then of that. And I think you deal with it by trying to put it into boxes to say that you had to maintain your cool, you had to maintain what you were trying to do, you had to be professional in how you dealt with both the victims and the victim's family as well as the suspect. Even though some of the things you had to deal with, it was terrible to have to even think of, let alone deal with the guy who did it. So I think you had to put them in. You had to compartmentalize a little bit,
Right.
and that's how I dealt. That's how I dealt with it anyway. But even to this day, one of the first murders I had to deal with still comes back to me as a little tiny baby, 4-month-old baby. Very, very difficult to deal with.
Wow.
So
And did you
and
get the culprit?
Both his mum and dad, the baby wouldn't stop crying, so they decided to. I mean, you don't really need this. It was too much to discuss, but yeah, and it was a terrible way for the little one to die. So, and I always remember I was a junior DC at Stoke Newington Police Station at that time. I got a phone call from Hackney Children's Hospital because the two parents who took the baby into the hospital said something's wrong with the baby, but then obviously they saw what they'd actually done. So that's always there. Other things that you do recall, but you have to put them away for when you get home because if you live at home, I saw the bad side of that from my dad, so I didn't want that to happen to Pam and my daughters. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's you tend to try and keep that away, really.
And Mum, how did she cope with your dad, who was obviously affected by this, just the best she could, I guess? Did she have a mechanism or not?
I'm not sure, to be honest. She was always the sort of the real matriarch of the family. She was the one at the rock that everyone went to. I mean, my older sister was very close to her as well, and it became, Mum was the constant, and Dad sort of he came in every now and then. The thing is how you looked at it, but it does take its toll, and it certainly took its toll on my dad. My dad he took to alcohol a little bit. He was very much more stressed than normal, and you see that a lot. You see that a hell of a lot in the police service, as you know, because it is difficult. It's difficult to cope with, to be honest.
Yeah.
But you have to, So that's
But your
that's
dad
really how that
clearly
came about.
was a committed public servant. He came out of the army and he knew
Yep.
and felt that that's what his vocation was in life, I guess.
Exactly, absolutely, 100%. I mean, it's unfortunately he died a couple of years ago, but clearing out the place there, you find his medals and his war record and things, all handwritten
Wow.
beautifully, and I didn't even know he had them still. So it was quite eye opening for my sister and I to go through and find all these things.
Any
But
brothers,
he
John,
certainly
or
was
not?
just a sister,
Just a
no brothers,
sister.
just a big sister who's a geologist and archaeologist, believe it or not,
Right.
and she was
Okay.
a headmistress of a big public school. So she's the educated one.
And did Mum either directly or indirectly kind of try and push you away from joining the police? Was it something that she felt you were going to be drifting towards or not?
I think so. I mean, she supported me a lot in the sport that I was doing. She'd take me to games here, there, and everywhere because that was going to be my thing. And unfortunately I didn't quite make it on both, so it was then a decision as to what to do. So I still like playing football and cricket, so I thought, well, a PE teacher's not bad. And I had a PE member of staff at my school. I went to an all boys Catholic grammar school, very sport orientated. I got on really well with the PE guys, obviously. And the next thing you know is, that you've got to go here, you've got to do this. And that's how I drifted into teaching, to be honest. But I was getting more money playing semi-professional football than I was teaching. So it was crazy in those days. But then when I joined the police, I ended up playing for Met Police anyway. So because Metropolitan Police had a semi-professional team anyway, still do. So it became a lot of sport as well in the early days. But
Right.
then as I became a detective, so that something had to give, and it had to be the sport, to be honest.
I can see you
Um,
more as a rugby player than a
yeah,
cricket
but
or
well
football.
now, now you can, yeah, not in those days.
Were you a skinny dude in the old
Yeah,
days?
yeah, probably. Yeah, I was probably 14 stone as the heaviest as centre back, and
Okay.
anything that moved, I kicked it, and that was it really.
That was
So
your job.
and that was it. Yeah, just centre half. Yeah. So,
So
but
did
no,
you
I actually. Sorry,
did
go
you
ahead.
get to the stage of any of the academies, or they didn't exist in those days?
Well, the academies didn't exist, but I was part of the Aston schools set up for Aston Villa, so
Okay.
I got selected for the what's known as in those days it was a youth squad. So I got into the England youth squad. Didn't play, just didn't quite make it, but that was at that level. And then back into semi-pro, which was quite good. I was in the Western League and played for league sides and all things like that. And then
Right.
back up into London, and that's how I ended up teaching in Essex, out in Upminster, and then hence the Met was the place to go once I decided that to move on. It probably coincided with Victoria, who my eldest daughter, who's now a vet. When we had a great 10-year plan, Pam and I,
Right.
it lasted 3 years, and there's Victoria. So that's that may have been a coincidence or not, but I don't know. But yeah, that's where that's when it all happened. So we
Right.
changed, and I became a policeman.
And tell me, one of the things that I remember vividly from the years we spent investigating and having some fun at the same time was your experience with the Yardies. Tell me a bit about Yardies and that time of life in London and the UK, and how different it was for you, or what the impact was on you and your career.
In fact, it's interesting. Really, I was talking about this the other day in the sense that it was a pure fluke that I actually became quite well known in that area of crime. I had a very good mentor in the police, as I did in the private sector, and I'm sure we'll come on to that a little bit later. But Roy Ram in particular, and Malcolm Hebron, who you know,
Yeah.
they were very much early days my mentors in the police, which was great. And I became a detective's constable. I went to Stoke Newington Police Station in northeast London, which was a predominantly Jamaican area.
Okay.
And it's changed quite considerably now. But in those days, it was quite a difficult area to police. And what happened, I was just happened to be the last guy standing, as it were, one night in the CID office. The phone call goes, and it was from City Road, which is the adjoining police station, the adjoining area. And they said, "We've had a murder. We need someone who knows everything about Jamaican organised crime. It could be a police driver, can do this, can do that." I didn't tick the box for anything. I'd just come from Romford, where I was doing rustling, and goodness knows what else, and a few armed robberies and things like that. So the next thing I know is I get sent down there, and sure enough, there is a murder, and it's a guy by the name of Innocent Igbalufu. I'll never forget it. Innocent Igbalufu was a Nigerian drug dealer who sold some bad sensimelia, which is a highly powerful cannabis, basically.
Right.
And five guys turn up and just throw him out the 10th floor window. And it caught, they said it was defenestrated, which I thought was quite good.
Not bad.
So he got chucked out the window, basically. And that suddenly there's five street names that we were looking for that, of course, I'd never come across this before. But I had, in the couple of weeks I'd been at Stoke Newington, managed to, I arrested a heroin addict. I flipped him as an informant. He gave me a name. It turned out to be one of the names of the five people that we had early doors. And over a 4-year period, I eventually arrested every one of them. So I got one on the night was a guy called Beaver, one in Bristol called Largy, Clement Attlee Largy, which again, these names are fantastic.
Great names.
And then Big Jubby, Little Jubby, I got Little Jubby in London, North London. And finally, the one was called the Jackal, Byron Lamard. And I eventually got him in Queens in New York about 4 years later. Little Jubby I got in Kingston, Jamaica. And it was through that murder inquiry that I suddenly realised that, hang on, there's a different thing here. It's not organised crime. It's basically disorganised organised crime. Whoever's got accessibility to either drugs, guns, money, transport, are a big guy for that second. And we as a police service, I think at those days, we didn't recognise that. We did not give credit to why these people 1 minute were selling cannabis on the street corner in New York, and the next week they're in Brixton driving a Mercedes with gold chains around their neck and having got a firearm and using cocaine. So we couldn't quite picture that, and it was because of that. Again, one of my mentors, Roy Ram, was tasked as senior officer to set up the Yardie Squad, as it became known. It was actually called Operation Lucy after the girl in the office. But the press got hold of the fact that we were looking at Yardies, which is the term that the Jamaican folks back in Jamaica used to call them, come from their backyard. And that's what Yardies is. It says from the backyard. Because don't forget, some of my best friends in the world are Jamaicans. They're the most brilliant people.
Yeah.
But the bad guys are really bad. And they know that. So over a period of time, several years, I ended up being on what became known in the press as the Yardie Squad. Became very much transatlantic all the time because these guys travelled on false British passports. So we were able to actually piece together really quite a good intelligence background to it, even though at the time that intelligence, was everyone was concerned for the political input. Is it just black on black? Are we being biased towards it, racist towards it? Which we weren't at all. It could have been blue, orange, green. It doesn't matter. But at the time, of course, it was quite sensitive. So that's how I became really interested in how I managed to work out and became quite adept at getting people to talk to me. That was natural. I listen. It's not what I say; it's what other people say.
Yeah.
And I spent weeks and months sitting in shebeens, which are illegal drinking clubs in the north of London, getting known by the ladies who cooked all the dinner for everybody, chatting away. They all thought I was crazy because I was obviously a policeman. I was 6'3". I was blonde, and they said, "What the hell's he in here?" Because I stopped their drug trade while I was in their shebeens. So
I
it
wouldn't
was
have
it was
thought
quite
it
an
was.
interesting.
I wouldn't have thought it was too easy for you if you ever considered it going undercover, John. I mean, it's not
I've
easy
never,
to.
never, never done it in my life, thank goodness. I've managed several major undercover operations, but never
Okay.
ever done it on myself. Never myself. I look
Was
too
it
much like a
was
policeman.
it
I still
was
do.
it something that you would have liked to have done, or was it just a different kind
No,
of policing?
no, it's a totally different mindset. I think. I mean, as you've met some of my team, like Sylvia Misson, brilliant undercover, fantastic. That's the person that you need who plays herself or himself. The undercover must play himself.
Right.
And when the evidence comes before them, I would be too tempted to just grab. When I was, as a police officer, you just grab. Well, these guys, you don't. You have to let it run. You have to think of the bigger picture, and you have to be managed accordingly. Yeah.
With its own but very different psychological impact. When you were handling people that were undercover, you must have seen the difficulties that they were going through in trying to separate their undercover persona from their real persona.
Yeah, that did happen. I think the other thing that was very, very important is to try and control the scenario that these guys are going into. And that was the biggest sort of challenge for me is to make sure that I thought of everything in terms of like a risk assessment, you'd call it nowadays. In those days, you just did it. You didn't have a term for it or whatever. So you had to assess what you need, what you're trying to achieve, and how you can control that environment, which is
Right.
very, very difficult to do. So you had to rely totally on the backup teams that support the undercover as well. Obviously, huge surveillance teams that you had to use, and it was the challenge was trying to maintain where you want to get with the overall case, but also ensure the safety of the undercover, which is number one priority. And the
Yeah.
other thing, of course, being Metropolitan Police, it was always if you had money, flash money, don't lose the money, because that would have been a bad thing. So and I only did that once, so that was I lost the money once, but there you go. But that is the sort of thing that was, and it's horses for courses, Gary. There's other people that couldn't manage anything. And I think when we come to talk about the corporate world, you'll see that there's very few, in my experience, law enforcement guys that have found the transition over to the private sector an easy thing because it's a slightly different mentality in terms of in the police, you're looking for conviction, you're looking for evidence to
Yeah.
to arrest and prosecute and put people away. In the private sector, the criteria is different. What you're trying to achieve, and in terms of is it criminal, is it civil? Is it just you want recovery of funds? You want what's the PR implications and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas, of course, you don't get that as a police officer, and therefore the transition is quite interesting. But
But you
again, I
do
was
get
lucky with
you do get that political stuff, or at least that you've when you and I watch TV
yeah.
programs now, the whole thing, and maybe it wasn't as prevalent, although I don't know that, the hierarchy, the way in which politics operated and either helped or got in the way of investigating. Did you come across that internal political thing when you were in the police or not?
I think it was there, but I think it's how you maneuvered your way around it.
Okay.
I got great mentors to teach me how to write reports that get the result that you're trying to achieve, and try to answer any specific questions that are coming within the report.
Right.
So it gave it the senior officers, almost a tick box. Yeah, we've got that, we've got that, we've got that,
Okay.
and that was a skill. That wasn't just made up. That you had to make sure that you knew what you're trying to achieve.
So who was your mentor? You mentioned, was it Roy or Malcolm?
Roy Ram at that stage, he
Yeah.
was, yeah, and of course he's still around, and he was terrific. I mean, he helped me a lot. There was him, there was John Grieve, who also is well known, and
Is
yes,
John
it's
is John around? Still around?
John's still around. Yeah, he's an academic now, and
Is he
I
really?
always
What
remember. yeah, I'm not sure which university he's at, but there was somebody I met very recently who said he was still still John Grieve, the same as I was John Grieve. I always remember he had the Battle of Waterloo in his office in the yard, so with all the soldiers on, and
Right. He was
great,
one of
great
these
character.
strategic thinkers, was he?
Yeah, great character, great
But
character.
he stood out head and shoulders above Roy
But
Ram,
no, Roy was definitely my number. For me, he
number
was
one.
perfect for me because he listened, he understood what I was trying to achieve. He let me have my head to do it,
Yeah.
but they always have my back, and that's something unique. So you can push the boundaries as far as you can go, but you can't go over them. And unfortunately, as you know, there's so many cases where people do go over the boundaries, and I've lost major cases as a police officer because of police corruption. One that was a 4-year inquiry. But at the same time, you also pick up great contacts throughout the period of time, which I still now use today, such as two very young barristers, which was Sally Bennett Jenkins and Brendan Kelly, both of which now are married, have 6 wonderful kids, and are both KCs at the Bailey in Inner London. So
Wow.
because of that, because of those relationships, they were junior counsel on a couple of the cases I did. One was a major rape case, one was another big drug case. And because of the working relationship there, that's gone on for 25, 26, 28 years, And now they're very, at the top of their profession. It's always nice to be able to pick the phone up and say, can you give me some advice on this, that, the other? Because we are not only colleagues, working colleagues, but we're friends because of it. Like yourself, I mean, as I say, you and I have we go back a very long
We
way.
go back a long
And,
way. So you mentioned the C word, the corruption word, which it's just like it's just another form of criminality because it's criminality, but it's more impactful for you and I because it comes from within the group that you would otherwise trust. So if you can, give us a flavor of either that corruption case that you were alluding to or something that really ripped the guts out of a case you were investigating.
Well, it's probably a good example of it anyway, and I I won't go into the details of the
Of the
names of the
names?
actual
No.
guys, but it was basically a 3 or 4 year inquiry, as I would call it. It was a linked inquiry with the uh, Met Police RCS, as it was, Regional Crime Squad, as it was then, the old Nine region. It all changed and became Southeast Regional Crime Squad, and eventually the National NCA. So that's the
Okay.
forerunner of that.
Yeah.
And we were working a lot with the guys up from Newcastle, which I think was 11 RCS in those days, and many others. And we ended up with 6 people in the dock in a London Crown Court. And in those days, I'm sure you remember, we had the PII hearings, which we still do now, public interest immunity. We
Oh,
had
I see.
several,
Okay.
we had several wiretaps on. We had all sorts of techniques that we were using that we had to obviously go and apply to talk to the judge and say we need your support in this PII application.
Yeah.
I did 2 weeks of that. We won on everything. And the one name I will name is John Kelsey Fry, who was then Senior Treasury Counsel, came
Okay.
into us and said, I'm sorry, gentlemen, your case stops now. And we'd done everything. We had lots of drugs, we had lots of evidence, we had everything. And it turns out that one of the guys that we'd actually charged for the offence was going to give evidence against a corrupt police officer on a team next to me, in the same office, but just the other side of the door, who actually was his corrupt relationship.
I see.
So we lost a massive case due to that, even though we were desperately unhappy because obviously we got through the difficult part of the PII hearing and we're all ready to go. And it was literally, gentlemen, it won't go any further. So that's where it really hit home to me because I spent a hell of a lot of time doing
Yeah.
that.
So it was
You
that
know,
was really politics in a way with or I don't know, public interest, weighing up the
yeah,
value
yeah,
of putting
yep.
away the guys that you were investigating as opposed to getting rid of a corrupt policeman.
That's correct. There were six people in the dock for us, and one was the contact guy with the corrupt officer.
As a matter
So
of interest, did that corrupt officer get done? Did he go down?
yes, he did. Yeah,
He did. Okay.
yeah. Thank
And
goodness.
did you come across this a lot or much in your time in the police or not?
Actually, no. I mean, obviously, it was there.
Yeah.
And you tended to, um, if you identified it, you had to do something about it. Clearly, I mean, but you could manoeuvre that. You knew that if something wasn't quite right, and it's going to impact your case, carry on doing it without getting anywhere near it.
I see.
There was a couple of things that were very interesting in that score, but again, it's in an organisation as big as what the police in London was, 33,000, whatever it was. There was only 3,000, I think it was, detectives. There was this nonsense about putting people back on interchange because I thought it was only detectives that were corrupt. That was total nonsense. But that caused a lot of detectives to the skill set that they've got to lose it and go back to uniform for years, 2 years, 3 years, whatever.
Wow.
That was a policy decision at the top, which I could never understand, because you put all this training and effort in to make a detective, and then you take it all away again, and he's on the street corner doing a traffic stop or whatever. So that I found interesting. When you got promoted, you had to go back to uniform. So I was lucky. I went to West Ham. I went to West Ham and as custody sergeant, sitting there taking notes of the guy coming in, and a very good former colleague of mine who was just been promoted from a inspector to a chief inspector was a uniform chief inspector at the same police station. So within 2 weeks, I had a drug squad that I was running, so it was fine, So it helped me not have to do too much in uniform as a sergeant. But
so what was the, before we move into the corporate sector, tell me what the most challenging, was it the Yardie set time? What was the most challenging period for you while you were in the police?
Challenging wise, I think was there's two things. I think the Yardies, the work with the Yardies was absolutely fantastic. We were cutting edge. We were doing transatlantic stuff. We had all sorts of great informants. We were informant handling in a different way. Again, all led by Mr. Ram and showing a new way of doing things. Um, we were able to get some extremely dangerous people off the street. That's both in the States, in the Caribbean, in Canada, and here. Because half the time you only had the street name which went with them, and the only way you could prove anything was with the fingerprints.
Right.
So that was satisfying. That was really satisfying.
Let's move into the transition. You're getting towards the end of your police career. What was it that made you think now is the time to jump into the private sector? Was there one thing that made you do it, or was it a combination of things?
There was a combination. It was timing in terms of meeting Mike Comer,
okay,
which was very, very, very instrumental, and also having some issues with. There were some threats to me and the family and stuff like that. And I
was
knew a
that
couple of
relating
guys.
to the drugs work that you were doing?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and Jamaican and the other stuff. So, but that being said, there was it was time. It was the right time, and Sam and I sat and talked about it for a long time. But anyways, having done that, again, mentors. It's all about mentors, and you. What I do, I like to take all the good parts from all the people I know,
yeah,
and other things I think okay. But then, of course, I met Mike Comer, who you know.
How did you meet Mike? What was the first instance?
That was through. Do you remember Mike Stannard?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, well, Mike Stannard was a customs officer.
Yeah.
And he and I came across each other, and then he was then working. He'd left the customs, same age as me, and he was with Mike.
Yeah.
And I got an introduction through him, and also through Sylvia, who you know is one of my team. Her husband's partner in the police, because he was a police officer as well, worked with Mike as well. So it was a small world. It was a very small world.
Was that Maxima, or was that still Network in those days?
No, that was Network. Because
was Network.
I went to Network with him. I was basically he and I went. He was going through extricating himself from Network.
Yeah.
When I got there, and he asked me to go with him, obviously, to create Maxima. We did a case in Dubai with the World Gold Council, which was Russian organised crime, which was quite interesting.
This was while at Network.
While at Network, yeah. And then that was the last job. Mike did at network, and then we both created. Well, he created it. I was his CEO, as you know.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's when we first met, just after with Maxima, because the way we got that particular job we worked on, which was obviously interesting, was where I sat on the plane coming back from Miami, and
I
the
remember that
ultimate
well.
client. Do you remember this?
I
And
remember
he
you
actually
giving me a call the next day and say, you're never going to guess who I met on an aeroplane coming back. But it is, that's what it's
that's
like
how it
when you're
started. Yeah.
traveling.
It is, and the blessing, the guy dropped his red wine all over my chinos, and we started chatting. And I just said, I'll stay in London until you get a chance to speak to your CEO, who turns out to be an extremely influential guy in Scottsdale, Arizona. Next thing you know, there's a knock on the door at Maxima's office, and it's Ben, as you recall.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, is we had a great job, and that always remains great fond memories, because everything we tried in that came off.
Yeah.
Which was brilliant.
It was a
So
great
that's how
case.
that started. That's how we started, really.
And so you gelled with Mike, and that convinced you, or Mike convinced you. Did you have any doubts that you'd be a great investigator? Were you cautious about making a move?
No, no, I was totally confident. I mean, it sounds wrong, but I don't have to try hard at it.
Yeah.
As you know me, that I can take in a lot of information and then come out with very precise. Well, this is, I think, what we need to do.
Yeah.
Making sure, I think what the most important thing I did was realise that it is different, but the actual skill set you've learned in the police is identical, and in some cases in advance of what the standard corporate investigative firm was doing in those times. It was Kroll, Jules Kroll, and Mike were the two sort of gurus, one each side of the Atlantic.
Yeah.
And there was very much a paper chase type of attitude towards, get a theory of the crime, theory of the fraud, all this. Whereas from the policing perspective, it's looking at the people, and it still is now. And that's a big thing for me. Is
Looking at the psychology of what makes them do what they do.
And for them to tell you. I mean, the most important, I don't think I've done any major crime investigation without someone tell me what they did and how they did it, or someone becoming an informant as to who did it. And then it's a case of corroborating the evidence, getting evidence to corroborate what that individual says, and then use the technology. Because, I mean, now as it's gone on, and I'm sure we'll get on to tech, but really it's now intelligence-led, but technology-enabled is the key in my view. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the intelligence-led piece is not just the analytics. It's not just forensic accountants looking at the numbers. They can give you the quantum. They can do this. They can do that, which is great. But they don't really tell you what's happened. So you need somebody human to say that. So I find that it's the combination of the human element, the technology, the ability to make sure you know what you don't know. So it's no use me trying to do a forensic accounting job. I've got Luke Stedman, to do that, who's the best I know, So bring people in. So you fit the square peg in the square hole, round peg in a round hole, and not have any ego about it. That's the biggest problem, I think, with a lot of issues is ego.
Yeah.
Whereas if you set a team together, which will include lawyers, which will include forensic accountants, with tech guys. Now you've got a lot of social media monitoring and all the AI stuff that's coming along. You still need the human element. And if you haven't got the human element, it's very, very difficult to actually understand exactly what you got. So that's where I think, certainly for me, I differentiate a little bit, because I'm very much into the very highly focused, highly directed human intelligence plus the others put together. No ego to say, well, I can do it all. I can't, far from it. And have the ability and the knowledge to now go anywhere in the world and feel comfortable to do it.
So do you still think that the focus on the human element is as good in the police? In other words, that it still has something to offer the corporate investigator? Do you think they have caught on as to how important that is?
This is a view.
Yeah. Go for it.
There's been because of over time, when I first started, I was encouraged to go and talk to people.
Yeah.
Encouraged to go and talk to criminals, because they're the ones who are going to tell you. Everyone will tell you something. Doesn't matter who they are, they'll tell you something.
Yeah.
The Jamaicans were brilliant at that. The guys that you caught would give up everything. give up their mum, give up their granddad, everybody, if they thought they were going to get a benefit from it. But what happens is, I think, because of circumstances and whether it's just inexperience, you've lost a lot of the experienced detectives at a time when it was really crucial, and that was political. The top sort of started having to answer questions that were really political questions, not getting the job done.
Yeah.
And so therefore, I think what happened is the skill of being able to get out there and listen has been deterred from officers who want to do it. Well, if you go and speak to a criminal, you might be said that you're colluding with a criminal.
I see.
Well, no, you're out there to try and find information, and you're not going to get information on a major crime if you go and see the local priest, or the rabbi. I mean, you may if it's interesting, but you have to go and speak to the people that are like it, who do it. And that was what we were encouraged to do, and do it in a way that was very structured, very clear. Every meet was contemporaneously recorded. Payments were made, but it's not just for money. These people do things for all sorts of different motivations.
What's the weirdest motivation you came across over the years that you said to yourself, "I can't believe it"?
Well, there was one very simple one, and the informant is a lady. She was absolutely brilliant, and I used to every morning when I used to go in I was a young DC at Stoke Newington at the time, and I used to go in and look at who'd been arrested overnight and see if there were any organised criminals from the the Yardies that I was looking for. Any of them might have just been arrested for shoplifting or something like that.
Right.
So I'd always go and have a look at who'd been arrested overnight. And there was a young lady who was in there for shoplifting of babies' nappies. And I'm thinking, hang on, and she was Jamaican. She said she was Jamaican. So I had a little chat with her. I said, look, what is it? And she said, oh, I've got a baby. My baby father's in prison. And she gave me all the names of who she. So I said, well, okay. So I cautioned her for the offence because it was literally just a bundle of nappies. And I went and bought her about 20 bundles of nappies and took her around to her place. Said, look, don't go stealing. There you go. Less than 2 days later, she gave me one of the biggest Krugerrand robberies that there was in North London. And she showed me where they were, who did it, and I got it. That's from nappies.
I love it.
So that just shows you,
that's a film,
yeah.
The Nappy Connection. Was she not nervous about her somehow being tracked down as being your source?
No, she trusted me 1,000%. I mean, there was we used to meet in a particular place, and she was brilliant.
Do you still have some sources and informants? I mean, is it something that the corporate investigation world obviously needs as well, or not as much?
Numerous. A lot of the money laundering cases that I'm currently tended towards a few money laundering cases at the moment.
Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic informants. And you use that information which you have to corroborate. Obviously, most people think of it as the uncorroborated evidence of a co-defendant is not really worth too much, and it isn't.
No.
But you have to corroborate it. But if you've got the information and you've got the direction and you go out to look at and gather evidence that corroborates that to a T, then that information and that direction is absolutely vital. And it allows you to do things much, much quicker than if the old-fashioned, I've heard so many US lawyers say, God bless them, it's all in the analytics. No, it's not. That's just nonsense. But they believe that because that's,
So that's a really interesting point that I've asked Steve Young, Ron Warmington. Yep. How did you perceive the difference and still see, because you're transatlantic, you've got offices in different places. What is the cultural difference between an investigator in America and an investigator in the UK?
I think it's very interesting because I'm lucky enough to have half a dozen who I think are top detectives. They'd be top detectives whether they're British, American, wherever. But you got to remember the system in America is geared totally different to ours.
Yeah.
So if you recall, at the rank I was at in the old days, I would arrest, charge, even indict. You used to do soup reports where you used to commit people after the event and all this sort of stuff. We did it. Yeah, the police did it. I used to gathering evidence, getting it to a grand jury, which obviously we don't have the grand jury system, and then getting warrants to go and arrest everybody at the end. Therefore, they are directed by lawyers. They're directed either in the state system
Is
by
that
district
better?
attorneys.
Do you think? Is it a better system, John, or not?
No, I think it's. I think a hybrid would be the best, where you had, which is what we ended up tending to do here, where you
Right.
have where we have case conferences, like we, with barristers all
Yeah.
the time. That tended to work extremely well in the early days before the CPS came about. To be honest,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I think a hybrid of the two would be the best system. But what happens is, because they're used to being directed to go and see this and go and see, it's a bit like intelligence services. You go to the intelligence services, you just go to the scene of that murder and see what you got. You come back and say, oh, it's a dead body. You then say, well, how did he die? Oh, hang on. And he goes back. So it's just a different way of looking at things.
Did you find the
but it's absolutely
transition?
true.
Did you find the transition?
Listen, I've got some great mates who are in the intelligence services, and I
Yeah.
wouldn't have anything said against them. But I'm trying as an illustration of what it's like. It's a different concept.
Did
So
you find
the
the
US
transition
guys, they're
difficult,
directed-
John? Did you find the transition
Well, no.
over to the States difficult?
No, not at all. And the reason behind that was I was working a lot from here, but ended up a lot of the time, as you know, in Washington, D.C., with a law firm called Hunter and Williams,
Yeah.
who are very much traditional, Virginia-based. They're the Philip Morrises of this world. That's their big clients, etc.
Right.
And Dave Jennison, who I've introduced you to and you've met many times, Dave was more like-minded of us, really.
So he was in the district. He was a district attorney or something, was he?
It was a U.S. attorney.
U.S. attorney.
U.S. attorney. Yeah, he was the federal side. Yeah.
Okay.
So he started off doing drug cases in Miami and ended up doing Pinochet and all the guys in D.C. and then he ended up in The Hague, as the U.S. representative in The Hague. So very much international.
Right.
And he gets it. He got it. That hang on a minute. The relationship between the lawyer and the investigator cannot be do this, do that, which it tended to be in the States. It has to be, well, what do you think? And that made a huge difference in the success we've had over I'm still working with Dave this week, that's how close we are still. And the reality is, because of that mutual respect to say, well, you've got a great idea there, I've got a great idea, you work together. And I think what happened with the stateside, and I don't know whether Ron thinks this, because Ron's had to deal with it, I'm sure, and Steve Youngie, I'm sure, did. But there is a difference. But what I found going over there and basing myself there for several years is that you could maneuver around that, because when the people come out of the federal or state and go into private practice, they too find it difficult because it's a different way of doing it. And the other thing I think that is very significantly different, and this is on the civil side, is injunctive relief. English, UK civil injunctive relief, the American lawyers go, oh my God, you can't do this, you can't do that. But of course, if you've got the appropriate jurisdiction hook, you can do it. And this is where I think there's a massive opportunity still now, because no one's really, you guys at Mishcon have done more than most.
Yeah, but there's still so much to be done.
And the lads at Quillen, I like very much.
Yeah.
Quillen Law, I like those guys very much because they get it, but at the same time they're still restricted because of the way the setup is done. The use of injunctive relief, the old Anton Pillar as it was, search and seizure, the Morava, and the good old Norwich Pharmacals, which are just brilliant. But of course the American side, they've never heard of them.
No.
So I think that's the ability to try and sort of cross over between the two jurisdictions, to be honest.
So I have there's so much to cover. I know we're going to have to do a John Brennan part 2, part 3. We probably create a whole Netflix series on you, John, but because it's already nearly 5 o'clock and I'm very conscious that I don't want to suck up too much, but I've been looking at the various things, your bio. Tell us a bit about the Glencore case. Which I think was one of the biggest that you did, was it? Or one of the most challenging in the private sector?
There was 2 parts to it.
Okay.
There's 2 ways of looking at it as well. I think the big issue was, and I can't go into detail, mate,
No.
Obviously, you know that, but it relied upon informants.
Yeah.
It relied upon informants being able to be corroborated in different jurisdictions. Okay, in other words, there was evidence in one jurisdiction that was corroborative of somebody in a different jurisdiction, which is unusual to do. You then got an ability to actually say, what the most important thing in that whole case was attention to detail.
But
Know
can you,
exactly.
without giving away too much, can you tell us what the core wrongdoing was? What was it that you were investigating, or do we have to move on to something else?
Uh, I think there's one that's all in the public domain which had
Okay.
exactly the same thing, which was international rectifier. Now that's a public domain thing. And that was falsification. It's the same really,
Yeah.
but it's the falsification of the numbers at the end of the quarter to hit a particular
Target.
expectation on the street. Yeah, so which obviously kicked in the bonuses for the senior people.
Yeah.
But in the IR particular, the area with that the bad guys used within was Japan. Now, I'm sure you've been to Japan. You know it's very difficult to get people to talk to you in Japan. One of my best ever informants, call it what you will. And so therefore we were able over a period of time to get the confidence and I spent a long time with this guy. And eventually, this is how crazy it is. We're in a HR hearing. He says, I need to go to the bathroom. I said, I'll come with you, just to get out of the room for 10 minutes. He gave me his telephone number. 2 days later, we're sitting in a hotel in the middle of Tokyo, and he's telling me everything. So there was a stage where he said, actually, this guy knows, he knows. And therefore, once he helped, so the whole of the office helped. And that whole office gave evidence to the DOJ and the SEC in Hawaii. And not one of them got prosecuted. So we did a non-PLOS agreement with the government of the US
Right.
to allow it to happen.
To give them
So
immunity.
exactly. So that was probably the one I'm most proud of because it was really thinking outside the box.
And
And
can you put your finger on what it was, or was it just this chemistry connection between you and this Japanese guy?
it was two things. It was patience. You had to be patient. You had to wait because it was clear he wanted to talk.
I see.
But you know that honor is everything
Yeah.
in Japan, and therefore it was being very difficult for him to say what he needed to say. But eventually, just by chatting, listening, treating him with respect,
Yeah.
great deal of respect. He loved golf, which was great, so I could talk about the Masters and all that sort of stuff. We talked hours about bloody golf, But eventually, he came across. And that also then morphed into another job where the bad guys actually stole the IP of that company going forward, and we were able to we extended into yet another project, if you like, out of it, where we set up a covert office next door to the office that had sprung up, and obviously we befriended people, and next thing you know is we're being invited in to see the formulas on the wall, which of course is our formula that was stolen. So that's a game where you use techniques that you had in the police that you use in the corporate world, and of course no one went to prison. This was all to save the company, which it did.
Yeah.
Its share price tanked when it had to. Had to put it. It's a public company. It had to go in the K's and Q's. It tanked, but it still survived, and eventually it sold, and it sold significantly to I can't remember now, Lucent, I think, one of the big tech companies.
Yeah.
So that was a classic win, but also proved it's all channel stuff in millions of dollars at the end of the quarter. So
Now.
but Glencore, because Glencore's well known, but I have
Yeah.
to be a little bit careful how I
Yeah.
talk about
Got
that.
it. So sadly, we're coming towards the end, but what I want to ask you is you've done so many investigations, you've achieved so much. What is yet to achieve? Is there a case? Is there a client you'd like to act for? What is it that is going to be for you the next challenge, the next sunshine mountain to climb, John?
I thought you were going to bring that up. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did teach you well to do the social mountain.
You did. It's stuck in my brain.
Yeah. I still do it every now and then, by the way, if I'm really bad.
Absolutely.
But anyway, I think where do I want to go? One, I still love it. I still enjoy doing it. I've still got the same team that we're all getting older, but they're still as enthusiastic and as skillful as ever. I've got a couple of new guys that come through that are brilliant. I think there is a transfer coming in terms of what type of cases now the corporate world looks at. I think everyone thinks the answer is going to be AI. I don't agree with that. I'd love to be able to find a job that I can show it's not AI, that it's the human element rather than anything else. One of those, I think, is more likely to be in the whistleblower space. I think whistleblower space is a huge market.
It looks like it's
changed,
really something that companies are starting to take notice of. So is that the area that you would like to make your name in as Mr. Whistleblower Expert, do you think?
Yeah, probably, yeah. Because I see there's so much opportunity, because it really is basically somebody who believes, and whatever the motivations are, you still have to put all the skill set to get the corroborative evidence that you need to support that whistleblower application. Now, as you know, in the United States, they've got new AMLA, Anti-Money Laundering Act 2022. There's all different priorities now. But that's a recovery, for example. Say if the banks are taken to task, because a lot of this is the big banks that just take no notice of transaction monitoring, of their Bank Secrecy Act obligations, et cetera, then if you then go after the banks, then up to a third of that recovery can go to the whistleblower.
Do you think that's on the final question? Do you think that's a model that should be adopted in the UK? Absolutely,
and I think it will be. I think there's a move slightly at the moment. I think we mentioned it the other day when I saw it, but I think there is absolutely nothing to stop it. I think the upside will be, we're all hit with banks. Everybody, you can't help it. It's the banks. But when you start looking at some of the egregious nature of what the banks do, the big banks, and these are major banks, they have to be brought to book. They have to be, because otherwise it's no. So you've got, Mr. Trump wants to take them out. You take the banking system out of them, they haven't got anything. If they can't move money and you move money in US dollars, they're totally stymied. But the bank's allowing it to happen. So his two priorities, and you know what Mr. Trump's like, it'll be one day with this, another day that. But there's a memo called the Transnational Organised Crime, I think it's Transnational Crime Memo that Pam Bondi did. Right. And it's really worth looking at, mate, because it really lays out something that I think is very significant in terms of taking out cartels. And of course they've linked it to fentanyl, because obviously that's the big drug situation in the States. But at the end of the day, you take that and you put it under this jurisdiction, the UK jurisdiction. There are plenty of similarities and plenty of things that are identical, that if one looks at the current legislation and what it could be, I think there's a huge opportunity. So that if I'm looking at something in the future, that's what I'd like to do.
That's what you'd like to do.
Become known as the sort of if you want to do a whistleblower, you've got to, first of all, people like yourself and me together
come to JB.
Pull it apart. Well, pull it apart, mate.
Before I go, I've got to ask you, your middle names. I didn't realize until I looked at Companies House. You've got some amazing middle names. John, Vincent.
Francis,
Francis.
JVF.
Vincent, after your great-grandfather or what?
No, unfortunately, that's my big sister, like Vincent Ball on the TV. That's how bad that was. Francis is the family name. My dad was Daniel Francis, my sister's Francis, my mum was Mary Francis. All my kids are Francis in the middle.
Okay.
But, Vincent. And if I really push it, my confirmation name was Michael. So I'm a John Vincent Francis Michael.
Oh my God.
Bit of a mouthful. Yeah, I'm a good Irish Catholic.
Listen, I can say the time has gone like in a click of a finger. John, it's been wonderful. We'll carry on when we see each other later this week, but it was lovely to go down a bit of memory lane. Thanks very much. Take care.
Look forward to it.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please click and subscribe to the Intelligence Advantage podcast on Spotify and other platforms.